So thanks, everyone. I'd like to welcome Suzanne Killick, who's the Director of Talent Acquisition and Development at York University. Suzanne will be moderating our student panel, which will speak to the students' lived experience with obtaining accessible content at post-secondary institutions in Ontario. So welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you, Andrea. I'd like to start off the panel by just introducing you to our four guests here. So on the far left, we have Jessica Watkin, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself. So Jessica?
Is this on? Oh, hi. Hi, my name is Jessica Watkin. I am a blind PhD candidate at the Center for Drama, Theatre, and Performance Studies at the University of Toronto. I love disability theatre and access on stage, and I guess I'm supposed to say what my aspirations are. I'm hoping to teach. I would like to be a professor at an institution, and I would also like to constantly be a part of the academic, artist, and nonprofit sectors. So I really love working in performance spaces. I really love working with blind people at the CNIB, and I really love working with students and teaching, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So next to Jessica, we have Ty. So Ty, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Ty Fellows. I'm a fourth-year medical student at the University of Toronto. Before starting medicine there, I did a bachelor's and master's at UBC, and I'm a proud Inuit Caucasian dyslexic medical student. Future aspirations, hopefully I match to a residency program, specifically emergency medicine.
Thank you. And so next to Ty, we have Faith. So Faith, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Faith Camilletti, and I'm in my last semester of law school at Osgoode Hall, so here at York. I'm very interested in disability rights. It's one of the things that inspired me to pursue law. I've been volunteering with the AODA Alliance, which is a grassroots disability rights organization. I've been working with them and Dr. David Lepofsky, their chair, since I started at Osgoode. And last year I should say, I also did a placement at Arch Disability Law Center in downtown Toronto, which is a specialty legal aid clinic that focuses on disability rights. And I guess my aspiration would be to pass the bar in June.
Thank you, Faith. And then we have Ben.
Does this one work?
Yeah.
Awesome. My name is Ben Ho Lung. I'm a first-year student at Seneca College and a former student here at York University. I'm legally blind. I actually just lost my vision about 2 years ago, so I've been sort of taking a break from school. This semester that I'm doing at Seneca is the first thing I've done since, I think, February 2017. In the meantime, I've been doing a bit of blind sports like baseball and hockey. Future aspirations, I guess, is getting my diploma from Seneca and possibly getting either of those sports into the Paralympics.
Excellent. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity to hear from four very aspiring students and very different fields to learn a little bit about what they can tell us about accessibility at post-secondary institutions. So they've each been given a list of questions before today. So I'm going to ask each one of them the same question and let them sort of respond. And they're very open to getting questions from you as we go along, or you can hold off your questions till the end. They're very comfortable with either format. So I'm going to start by asking the first question, and we'll maybe start again at the end there with Jessica. Can you share your experiences with obtaining accessible content at the institution you're attending?
Yes, I can. Gaining accessible content. So I started graduate work at the University of Toronto 4 years ago with my master's, and I had originally finished my undergraduate degree at the University of Guelph, which is significantly smaller than University of Toronto, which I knew. However, I didn't realize the ease of access to which I was accessing my, especially content. I did a double major in English and theater. I was reading on average 15 books per term with only my ears. I learned to knit while doing that, so I wouldn't fall asleep. And Athel Gow is actually in the back. Hi, Athel. And he did most of those that content for me, which is really great. So coming to U of T, my experience was very different, mainly because I was doing graduate work, and something that graduate work in the humanities doesn't work on syllabus-based, course-based work. I don't have a syllabus in September that is the same through to December. It doesn't have the same texts. Luckily, I am in a department, the Department of Theater is very social justice infused, and so we actually went paperless, so all the professors actually upload digital copies online, which is really great, except sometimes they'd upload them 2 days before the reading was due, which trying to articulate to my my department, my faculty, that isn't okay. They don't understand that. Academics don't understand things like that. Accessibility and equality and stuff. Equity. So actually a lot of my text in my first bit was predominantly through my faculty, which was kind of brand new to me. However, they weren't screen reader available, which is kind of difficult for somebody who doesn't read with my eyes very often. And so I'm actually kind of trying to learn how to read theory, deep theory, Freud, Foucault, all that kind of crap, with my ears, which is 1,000 times harder than anything else I've ever experienced. So it's been a slow process. And then moving into my comprehensive exams, which I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with, but I read 150 plays in a 6-month period and then wrote a 4-hour sit-down exam. Those 150 plays needed to be accessible and OCR accessible. And it was the first time that I guess the University of Toronto Library Services had been approached by a faculty member as opposed to a student to get the text accessible, and they almost wouldn't respond because usually it's the student approaching. But what my department is, and I think it's just me not shutting up about how blind I am and how much I need equity in this graduate program, but they actually they didn't want to release the list of the 150 plays until all of them were accessible for me. So they actually worked with my director and the accessibility officer at my department, which is very small, worked with the accessibility services in the library at U of T to make those accessible for me, which was really, really great. And I now have a underground black market of all these plays, which I'm really popular in my department right now. But it was really, that for me was the first step in kind of big change for me. Not only my department taking such a big step in my own accommodations, which has never happened, but also to have the response from accessibility services be so open to kind of that change in process. The only other thing I really want to mention about my access to content is a lot about how quick it comes. So I'm a graduate student. I don't know sometimes which texts I need for a conference paper. Maybe I'm writing that conference paper a month or 2 days before I present it. And sometimes I need things much faster than sometimes I'm very aware that you can provide it for me. A lot of the times I'll be like, hey, I need Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto in OCR reader availability by the end of this month, and sometimes I will never hear back. It's infuriating. It's one of those things where I want to finish and do all my work the same level as all of my colleagues, but I literally can't. I do have a CCTV that I use, so in the event that I need to go and get the physical copy of a book, it just takes 1,000 times longer, and the CCTV is massive. It's the size of this table, so it's, maybe half the size of this table, but it's still, it's not portable. It's not something I can take on the bus with me or whatever, and so in terms of usability, that's really frustrating. And then the other side of all of this, that's me as a student. I'm also a TA now. I mess up everybody's everything when it comes to TAing because there's even less of a structure to access those texts. If I'm TAing, I need to get those texts before September, especially if I'm going to be teaching a tutorial on a play or on a piece of text. So it's actually, my response to this and my last comment will be, we still have no system at U of T right now. For me, as a blind TA and as somebody who is applying to teach a course as like an undergraduate course next year, I want to make all my course content accessible. I am not a member of faculty, and so my department doesn't know. Accessibility services at the library services at Rovar's Library doesn't know, and it sometimes kind of feels like on top of doing a PhD and being blind and a PhD on a really emotionally heavy subject, I also have to then do extra labor constantly, and not just advocacy labor, but labor of being like, hey, like, let me figure out this new system for you all. Not accusing anyone, but it is something that I don't get paid enough for. I wish there was an extra stipend for the amount of labor that I have to do to get that.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
I saw your fellow panel members, as you were talking, nodding as though they were kind of relating a lot to what you were saying. So let's hear from Ty and see what your thoughts are on this particular question.
Yeah.
I'll just repeat it again if you like. Your experience with obtaining accessible content at the institution you're attending.
Yeah, so I guess my answer to that is that I feel like it's more of a process. As time goes on, I find that there's newer technologies, as well as I think improvements on older ones. And so it's about, I guess, keeping an open mind to accepting new formats and trying to learn as time progresses. But I should state that like this is kind of like a new domain for me, because it was relatively recent that I had the formal diagnosis. It took a mishap during the curriculum for, I think, to get flagged and for me to seek help. But this has been my whole life. And so I think I'm still new to the field, and so I haven't had experience in getting content. Sorry, I'm a little nervous here.
You're doing great.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So the question again. Do you mind repeating the question?
Sure.
Thanks.
Would you like me to come back to you?
No. I want to give the answer.
All right.
No, I have a lot to say. It's just like it just went blank.
Don't want to rob you of your moment.
Yeah,
there,
no.
okay? So the question is your experiences with obtaining accessible content at the institution you're attending.
Yeah, so I think this just relates to the fact that this has been so late, and so I find that the biggest struggle I have is actually knowing what's out there. Mm-hmm. And so I guess my go-to resource is the accessibility services, as well as things beyond it, online resources like Bookshare, which I have yet to subscribe to, but I plan on doing it after. Kurzweil. So it's about learning as I go. That's how, and I guess just communicating with peers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Faith, tell us about your experiences in gaining accessible content at York.
Sure. So my story with accessible content, I think, is sometimes a little bit different, maybe than my peers, in that I have a physical disability. I have rheumatoid arthritis in over 40 joints, and for me, one of my biggest concerns is just being physically strong enough to participate in school. And law school, I didn't really think about this before I got in, but it's very physically demanding. And one of the things for me would be just carrying heavy textbooks. It's really hard. I can't. So right now I have a huge Canadian Income Tax Act that's annotated, and I can't carry it to school. So accessing accessible content here at York has actually been very, very good for me. In first year, all the law students have the same classes, so I was able to get an accessible textbook for all my classes. The trickiness got into upper year, so in second year and third year, where you're able to pick kind of what courses you want and go into whatever direction of law you want. But what that means is that the textbooks aren't always available. My experience so far at York has been, you come as a student, you get set up with accessibility services. They, check all the boxes for the accommodations you need. One of those for me was accessible content. So basically, there's an online software where you go, you sign in, and all your textbooks should be there. I guess just so basically one of the biggest issues for me in terms of getting accessible content would be what happens if my textbook isn't available. They are really good at the library. You can go, if you purchase the book, they'll cut off the spine for you and they'll scan the whole thing for you, which is great, but that just means it's an out-of-pocket expense. And I would say that overall in the past 3 years, that would be one of the barriers, is that if something isn't available in an accessible content, like last year, for example, I couldn't get my evidence textbook, and then it was going to take too much time, so then I ended up just buying the online version. So I would say that getting accessible content at York has been pretty good in general. Just it ends up costing a lot of things with disability end up just costing so much money out of pocket. But I'm seeing some nodding heads, so you guys already know that. Okay, I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Faith. What about you, Ben? Tell us about what your experience has been.
I actually just wanted to agree. I think that York is usually pretty good about providing accessible resources. One of my biggest issues when I started here back in September of 2016 was a month later, I was declared legally blind. And I didn't really have vision problems when I was a kid or anything like that. So for me, I was adjusting to post-secondary education for the first time and also trying to do it with only 5% of my vision left. So one of my biggest problems was I didn't really know what kind of accommodations I needed. But the nice thing about accessibility services here is that we sat down, we talked, we worked together really extensively, and we figured out some different things that I could do. Where I ran into other problems was, like, some professors, I'm not gonna name names, some professors are a little less willing to accommodate people, or maybe not just as knowledgeable about what people need. Like, I had this one professor who refused to post her slides online because she said, and I quote, they were her intellectual property, even though she was paraphrasing from a textbook that she didn't write. But she said that she would be willing to give me copies of handwritten notes, which is all well and good, but even the sighted people in my class couldn't read her handwriting, so wasn't really useful. I still managed to pass that course, though, so I'm kind of proud of myself for that. Yeah, so another thing, at Seneca now, I'm finding it's pretty good for the most part. I get like a PDF of the notes or somebody sends me a copy of the slides, which is great. But, and this is kind of a good thing, kind of a bad thing, is that a lot of courses are moving more towards a paperless format, which is awesome. We're saving the trees. I think that's great. But where we run into problems is that a lot of these online activities aren't really friendly to people who can't see that well. Like, you'll have these workshops or like these little sort of mini game activities where you have to click and drag different pictures into boxes, but like, I have no idea what I'm clicking on or where I'm supposed to move it, so it's like, what am I doing here? So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, there are some good things, there are some bad things. I've had really great experiences, some experiences that are iffy, but for the most part, I think that as long as people are willing to work with you, you can sort of figure it out and you can make it work. That doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement. There definitely is, but I guess that comes with time and people speaking up and just saying, hey, why don't we try to do things a little differently? Have you considered this or that or the other thing? So, yeah.
Thank you. I wonder maybe I could just pause with the panel right now and see if there are any questions from the audience based on what you've heard. Yeah, there's a question in the back.
Hi, thank you for your comments, folks. I just want to get some clarification from Faith, because I'm not sure I understand what you said about when you said you had to purchase the textbook and that's expensive. I'm not sure if I understand the difference. Is it because every student has to purchase, I'm assuming would have to purchase the textbook. Is there an added cost, or is it the fact that you don't keep the text because now it's been sort of half destroyed to get it? Is that what you were referring to?
That was more, I should have clarified, right. So everyone has to buy a textbook, right? But one of the advantages, I guess, was that if a book is already destroyed by York Library Services, I don't have to go and purchase a book to be destroyed. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for clarifying. That was my mistake.
Any other questions at this point? Okay. So maybe we'll start with Ty this time. And I think you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe if you want to expand it a little bit more, of the kinds of barriers you encountered in securing accessible content. So any specific barriers and potentially what could have helped you better?
Yeah. So I can only speak to my experience, but I guess it helps to understand what makes me a bit different in that I'm 28, and so I was diagnosed at 28, although I've had this my whole life. And so to kind of be prompted with a situation like, wait a minute, like maybe there's something here that you thought wasn't. To get to that position took a lot, and then once there, there's a whole process of acceptance of like, okay, like what does this mean? Is this true? What do I do? And then after that, understanding what is available to me, what resources to take. So all of that was, I guess, over the last, year. So I think the biggest barrier for me personally was that idea of acceptance, because I think ultimately no one wants to be different, right? And so if I've gone my whole life going like, oh, I think I'm normal, and then boom, like, maybe I'm not. But then it makes me question, like, well, what exactly is normal, right? Like, if you test me on a certain time test, if I don't do it, is that not normal? Well, no. But if we use that as measures of normal, then yeah, I'm abnormal. So it's all about reframing, it's reframing what we define as knowledge, right? And so that helps me kind of overcome, I think, what society quotes a disability. I kind of think of it as like an indirect strength, because what it does is it makes me realize like, oh, I've developed all these coping strategies because this was there. So in a way, yeah. But in order for me to get to that point, that took a lot. So I think that was my biggest hurdle.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It must have been quite an ordeal process to go through.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Faith, what did you find as your biggest barrier?
Sure. I would say one of my biggest barriers so far at Osgood has been a lack of awareness of universal design. And I can share an example from this semester. So I'm in my last semester at Osgood, and it's the first time that I've seen a classroom with a laptop ban. So my tax law class, where there's no laptops allowed, and our prof right up front says, if you have accessibility issues, you can come talk to me, I'll give you accommodation. But one of the issues with that is that now every student who's asked for accommodation, I didn't ask for accommodation, so I'm just sitting there with my notebook. But one of the issues is that if you did ask for accommodation, you're now singled out. So all the students who do have accommodation are now publicly seen by the other students, right? Because if they're working on a laptop, now everyone knows that they have accommodation. And that kind of fits into one of my other issues, or one of my other barriers that I've had so far at Osgood in terms of universal design. And that would be that it's law school, it's very competitive. So one of the policies is that everything is done confidentially. So we have these confidential student numbers that we use for all our assignments, all our midterms, and exams. But one of the issues is that when you think about accommodation and how accommodation fits into that process, if you want to advocate for yourself, if you need to talk to a prof, if you're having an issue, you're automatically taking yourself out of that confidentiality policy, because the prof won't necessarily know, which exam, like confidential exam numbers are students that have accommodations, but they'll know, okay, this pile of 5 exams was accommodated. And I think that, I don't know, that's just an issue that I have, because when I first started at law school, I was used for advocating for myself in my undergraduate degree. I did medieval history at the University of Waterloo, so it was really nerdy. But I would always go up to my profs at the very beginning of each course and say, hi, I'm a student with a disability. I need accommodation for your classroom. I want you to know that right away. So same thing happened at law school. My first day of law school, I went up to my first prof, and I said, hi, I'm a student with disability. And he said, Faith, you don't need to tell me that. It's confidential here. You don't need to worry. But then every time you run into an issue with accommodation, you have to talk to the prof, and then they don't want to talk to you. So then you go to student services, and then they're advocating for you. But then, after maybe 4 or 5 emails back, they say, well, why don't you just talk to your prof? And it's like, okay, great. So I'm so glad I tried to, stay under the, so it's just, I think that there's a lack of awareness of how universal design can really play into making our learning environments accessible. I think one of the things Osgood does really good is that they have a recording policy. So all our classes are recorded. If you miss a class for a disability reason, for a non-disability reason, maybe you're just not, maybe you're just an audio learner, so listening to the lecture another time would be helpful. That's an accommodation that's always available. And I think that if we look at universal design, that's just showing us how those recordings can be helpful for everyone. So I think that's probably my biggest barrier, is just how, on paper, everything is supposed to be good, but there's these conflicts with how the system works.
It sounds like you ran into some mixed messages about, how you declare and so on. Yeah, thank you for that. Ben, tell us a little bit about some of the barriers that you encountered.
I actually just wanted to build on that communication thing really quick. This happened earlier this year for me, actually. I went to the library asking about getting a PDF, screen reader compatible version of a textbook, and they said, oh, we can't do that for you here. You should go talk to your student advisor. So I said, okay, I'll make an appointment with my student advisor. So I went to talk to them, and they said, oh, you need to go and talk to counseling services. You can make an appointment with them by calling the front desk, or you can make an email. So I emailed them. They said, you have to call this number and make an appointment. I was like, okay, I can do that. So I made an appointment, and I talked to them, and they said, well, you can just go to the library and ask them for a PDF copy. I was like, wait, what? So what ends up happening is I just went and Googled a PDF copy of the textbook myself after going through a week of trying to figure out, hey, how am I supposed to get this to work exactly? So I guess one really big thing is communication between different departments, because they don't always know what you need, because again, like you said, there's the whole confidentiality thing. Professors aren't allowed to ask you, but then you tell them and they're like, oh, well, I don't need to know that. But when you have an issue and it comes up, you have to tell them, hey, because of my disability, I can't do this. Is there something that we could do about that? And they say, well, maybe. Another problem for me specifically, and I guess I can kind of relate to the professors too, is neither of us really know what I need, because I'm still new to this whole studying with a disability thing. Because when I was in high school, I could see normally. Now I really can't. Like yesterday, there's the microphone. Blind people problems, I'm sorry. So yesterday I had to write a math test, but I couldn't read the paper, and there wasn't an online version or a PDF. So what I actually ended up doing was my professor and I ended up talking to each other, and he ended up scribing for me, writing out all the equations, reading the questions to me. I just had to tell him the process that I would have taken to solve all of those problems, which is great. It's kind of funny because he's always saying, don't do the math in your head, use your calculator. And I'm like, well, I can't see my calculator. I don't. But that actually ended up working really well. I thought it was really interesting. And so I guess what I'm saying is, again, one of the biggest things is communication. Another thing is people's willingness to accommodate you and their ability to accommodate you based on what they know about whatever it is that you're going through. I think it's important for anybody who needs an accommodation to be able to effectively communicate what they need. But I also think that it's important that you sort of try a lot of different things, experiment, explore, push yourself so that you can figure that out and articulate it as best that you can. Because at the end of the day, you are your best advocate. So you need to know how to do that if you really want to succeed.
Thank you, Ben. That's great. Thank you for sharing. So let's go. You wanted to add something else, and then I'll go to Jessica.
Add to that point.
Yeah.
When I was given the formal diagnosis, I thought there would be some sort of process of okay, what's out there for me? And I don't know, it seems easy enough to this is what people with this disability use. They find this really helpful, and then if this is your disability, there's kind of like a list that I think I would really appreciate that doesn't exist, or at least I don't know of one that exists. So that might actually get to, I think, what would help you out.
Yeah,
Ben.
yeah. Thank you. So, Jessica, tell us a little bit about some of the barriers you've run into.
Well, it fits in nicely with what everyone is saying, because something just this year, I mean, I could talk for hours about all the barriers that I feel like I've experienced over the 8 or 9 years I've been in post-secondary. But in terms of just this year, I sat down with my director of my entire department, and she said to me, I've always been taught that disabled people should know what their needs are. And I was like, Tamara, I've never taught a course before. I don't know how. I don't know what I need. And so the biggest thing for me, I hear you, Ben. I hear you saying we as disabled folk, and I have been the person to tell a bunch of blind kids. I mentor a ton of blind people at CNIB, and I'm like, you gotta know what accommodations you need. You gotta know what the access that you need. And I'm like the biggest advocate for that. And then I get into this situation where I'm going, I don't know what I need. And it's not even that. It's not that I'm not willing to try new screen readers, new software, Kurzweil, learning how to use OCR and another. I recently just bought a new Mac computer and an iPad so that I can read and write at the same time. And I'm totally willing to try everything. I only get paid for 4.5 years to do my PhD, and in my undergrad, you got actually a discount. I don't know, something. Guelph does this really lovely thing where if you take a lower course amount, you get reimbursed for the course that you don't take, which I think is radically cool. I only get paid for 4.5 years, and I'm in my 3rd year now. I had a bunch of professors be like, well, why don't you just try out a bunch of stuff? And I'm like, pardon me? I don't have time for that. You only pay me for 4.5 years. There's no disability. Sorry, a lot of my stuff is about money, but that might be because I feel like that's unfortunately the world that we live in. And I would love to figure out the best way to access this content and the best way to read. And similar to what you're saying, Ty, there is for me, for a blind person, there is a list of well, have you used Kurzweil? Have you used Zoom Text? Have you used Evernote? Have you used this? And I'm like, I see that list and I'm in theater, so sometimes I'm teaching a studio course where I need to be holding my iPad with a script and teaching at the same time, or I need to be holding a script and interacting with my peers in a course situation, and I don't know how to do that. There's no Kurzweil that solves that problem, and then it's up to me to figure it out, which is great. I'm happy to do that labor, but I need some sort of support. I need someone to understand what I'm going through and emotionally support me as well, because not only am I trying to get through all this material, but I'm also trying to do 800 other things. And I think the biggest barrier for me is to know what I need. I think we all just said that, but I guess I'm re-articulating it into a little bit more of a capitalistic sense as well, that university costs money. I know you said that as well, Faith, it costs money. And I think in the panel just before me, the ladies were talking about Mac versus PC. A big thing for, just some context, ADP, which I don't remember what that acronym is, Assistive Device Program or whatever, it only supports PC. I actually got an iPad through ADP, which is you can apply for this money to supplement your access needs, specifically for visually impaired, although I'm not quite sure if it's for all different kinds of disabilities. And when I told the people at the CNIB that I was applying for an iPad, which is a Mac thing, they were like, oh, the government's not going to say yes to that. So it actually, Mac is, in my opinion, superior for blind people. The accessibility is way better, but the government doesn't acknowledge that. So we don't get funding to support the accessible technology that we need either. So the screen readers are better, the apps are better. It's infinitely better. I'm not sponsored, although I wish. But I just got this Mac, and I'm like, this is amazing. I had to pay for that all by myself. And so the access to these new solutions that I'm creating, I'm so proud of creating them, but it's taken a lot of labor and a lot of stuff that I don't know if my colleagues who are sighted, who are non-disabled, have had to go through the same thing. So that's like the biggest barrier for me. And I guess to like combine with that is the understanding of my faculty, of my accessibility services advisors, that's the work I have to do. When you ask me what's best for me, there's a behind the curtain of that question, right? Like I have to produce these needs out of nowhere, and that's hard. That's hard work. You're asking a lot from us, and yeah, that's the end of my thought.
That's great. I wonder if we can just pause here. You've heard, the panel speak about some of the barriers they ran into. Any thoughts that have been provoked for you that you'd like to ask them or comment on? Yes. Oh, okay.
So having just presented on the on the PC versus Mac, I actually wanted to ask the panel, do you find that in the general case that, or have you had the opportunity to try both platforms, both Mac and PC, and is there a noticeable difference? Because that really would inform our purchasing strategies. Are Mac superior in your opinion?
Any thoughts from Ben? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I guess I can take that. Is it? Okay, yeah. I know where it is now.
Yeah.
I can do it this time. I was just going to say that back when I could see normally, I had an Android phone. I really liked it, but as my vision was getting worse, I just couldn't use it. They have accessibility features, but they just weren't very intuitive, I guess. So I ended up switching to an iPhone, and I love VoiceOver, so much so to the point where I don't really use my PC at home anymore if I can. Just because for me trying to find the mouse or like trying to learn how to use a screen reader like Kurzweil or Dragon or whatever, it doesn't really appeal to me. And Windows has a narrator program too, which I use on my laptop, but I'm gonna be totally honest, I hate it. Like it's kind of glitchy too. It's really not pleasant or easy to use. And when you're doing like 20 hours of class a day and then an insane amount of reading and stuff too, it's like you want to have something that you can rely on, something that's consistent, something that's easy to use. And personally, that's why I like Apple products, just for accessibility features.
Any other members? Ty?
Yeah. What I find useful is actually comparing how Windows approaches a problem versus Mac. And I think it's safe to say that, Mac actually has they're much more focused on the user experience. And so I think it really identifies what isn't working and it gets rid of that. So I guess that's the value I get out of Windows versus Mac. But I think both are great. I have both.
Yes, one more person at the back.
I just have a question from
sorry.
the live feed. First an effusive note of congratulations. The individual said you folks are doing great, and I'd like to echo that. I think this has been so helpful already. And so the individual adds that I would like to add to Faith's comment about accessible formats earlier. Yes, all students have to buy textbooks, but let's be honest, most will be used if they can, right? So they're favoring the used textbooks. But a disabled student can't buy used textbooks and save money because they have to show a receipt for a new textbook, I guess in this case. So yes, this is not equitable access.
Thank you. So comment at the back.
Thanks very much. I had to wade in just a little bit on the Mac versus PC thing, just because I work in assistive tech, and I think they both had their respect. In my opinion, they both had their respective uses. I mean, the Mac has good quality built-in speech that some students really appreciate. Unfortunately, Dragon has just sort of ceased support for Dragon Naturally Speaking on the Mac platform. So And comparatively, Kurzweil 3000 is a better program on the PC when you look at it. So, depending on what you need, sort of one platform might be better than the other. But I actually just want to ask you guys though. I mean, a lot of times, I mean, you must get documents that maybe the original document quality isn't that great, so that when you're using readback, when you're using software that has built-in OCR, maybe you're hearing kind of a lot of clangers, like a lot of mispronounced words in the readback. I'm just wondering, how much that is your experience, or how much you guys want to get sort of documents where the source text is cleaned up, or whether or does it depend on the situation? Is sometimes just getting the things that have been sort of quickly scanned in OCR, is that good enough, or what's your experience with the document quality?
Jessica, you want to speak?
Thanks, Athol. So those 150 plays I was mentioning, a lot of them were in translated texts, Spanish, so they would be pronouncing the names right, but then like a word like though would then be like, and I'd be like, oh, what's that? And I'd have to, I think there's a lot of times where I'm reading a text where, I think Anita, I've talked to you about this as well, where it's just like the words come out so wonky, and I don't know how to identify it to the people. Like there's no way for me to say it other than the words are wonky when something responds back, and sometimes that I can't read the thing, which for all of us probably is not acceptable. Also, I would say I would love it to be cleaned up. I had a book scanned that the scan was really bad, and so when I listened to it on screen reader, there was, I guess, lots of flecks on the scan, like a really dirty lens or whatever, and so it just kept telling me that there were ellipses, like ... and I was like, oh, he might just be like a really William Shatner writer, like he was just taking like really intentional pauses, because it was Patrick Anderson's Autobiography of a Disease, and I was like, oh, that might be like intentional, because I don't know, and that directly affects the way that I read the book. So yeah, I think, however, to answer that question a bit more fully as well, there are some times where I'm like, I need Donna Haraway-Steinberg Manifesto in 2 days. I don't care how the quality of that one is, because I need it now. I think that's my, I would sacrifice quality for immediacy. However, if it's something like a list of 150 plays where they knew 6 months in advance or 4 months in advance, like always a clean version would be, in my experience.
So I'm going to move us on to the next question, if that's okay, and maybe we'll start with Faith this time. So the next question is really just about some of the coping strategies that you've adopted or figured things out that you'd be willing to share with us.
Sure. So I've had arthritis for over 20 years, so I grew up with it, and I guess that doesn't make it any easier, though, to necessarily handle. I would say that the biggest supports that I've had in law school have been just my team of people, however you want to call it. So I have really supportive parents, and I have a really loving partner, and I really struggled living on my own in my first year, and then I thought I was going to have to get attendant services, and that's another out-of-pocket expense for a lot of disabled people. I was really worried about that, and then my partner ended up moving here to Toronto with me. So I would say definitely the people in my life are a big support in terms of just being there for bad days when there are barriers. And I would say that another great support that I've had in that same kind of category would be that at Osgoode, there's two mental health counselors that just work with the law students. And what's really cool is that the counselor that I see used to be a lawyer. So she has the mental health training or the psychotherapy, whatever she's trained in, but then also she has the law background. So that's been very helpful for me. And I think just based off our discussion today, a lot of the issues that cause me a lot of emotional distress are usually barriers. So just being able to talk to a mental health professional that also has training in terms of how the environment is affecting the person, that's been a really great support. So I would say the people in my life, and then also the mental health counselors at Osgoode.
Excellent, thank you. Ben, tell us about your coping strategies.
What I really like to do is just sort of keep myself busy, I guess. So when I'm not focusing on like the stress of school or getting a bus on time or whether or not I'm going to get hit by a car when I'm crossing the street, I like to play baseball or hockey or play piano or guitar or something. I find that it's kind of weird, like it's kind of frustrating sometimes just because there are a lot of things that I can't do anymore that I used to be able to, like drive or read a book or watch a movie. So I have a little more free time, I guess. But one of the things that helps me a lot is just being able to talk to my friends and family and like a counselor or anybody, just sort of vent my frustrations or take that energy and channel it into more positive things or use music as an outlet or sports or something like that.
Thank you for that. Jessica.
Similar to everybody else, I mean, I have a therapist who I love. I've got a loving partner and friends and kind of chosen family. I'm very practicing interdependence right now. If I can't get a text fast enough, I call out for a convoy on Facebook who wants to take me into the 14-floor library, into the stacks. I've got a really supportive supervisor. But I think the biggest thing, short anecdote, in December I was at a symposium in, first weekend of December, I was in a symposium in Concordia. It was like pissing down rain. And I fell down a flight of stairs and I sprained both ankles. I was with 3 sighted people. It was their fault, not mine. Hashtag barriers everywhere. And I sprained both ankles, couldn't walk. And I was in Montreal. And humor is a coping mechanism that I use, which like may have been relevant here. But I've had people tell me that it seems like I'm coping's a weird, like it's a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism, but it seems like a way that I work through it. I'm also an artist, so I do a lot of art performing embodied practices. So I do a lot of like, I'm in a shameless plug here. I mentioned earlier that I was knitting. I'm currently a part of an art collective that's coming to the X Space downtown on March 1st called Productive Discomfort. So using rug hooking, where I'm making a rug, which like makes me sound 75, and that's fine. I'm owning it. But it's very therapeutic and embodied practice. I find a lot of the things that I do in terms of coping tend to be a bit more embodied because I've been blind since I was 18, so almost 10 years. But I find that I process a lot in my brain because I'm in academia and not in my body. And so I've been trying to really bring the processing down. I feel like my anxiety goes up when I don't process with my body. I get really sick or I get tummy aches and things like that, which sounds really hippy dippy, but it is something that really helps me is getting into doing yoga, making art with my body. I do lots of writing and stuff like that, but I don't find that as therapeutic or as like coping. I don't cope as well unless I'm kind of in my full body. So humor and body practice for me. Thanks.
Yeah. Humor's often seen as a coping mechanism on more than one front. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Ty, tell us about your coping strategies.
Yeah, so I won't add to, I think you guys brought up great points, investing in friends, family, and activities. I do all those myself. But to, I guess, identify some practical ones, I kind of think of it as a coping mechanisms in an academic environment versus coping mechanisms outside of academia. And so, and also because of, I think, my situation, my coping mechanisms before my assessment and after have also evolved. So in academia, I find that keeping a very clear desk space just prevents a lot of distractions. I find having earbuds in my ears takes away those small sounds, creaks in the floor, the car driving by, just the small distractions. Try to identify all key deadlines and to finish a product. That's probably the biggest issue I have is time management. But I do make an effort to start weeks in advance. Outside of academia, I find making my bed every morning, washing my dishes, just the small things, because I find that when the things around me are disorganized, it's probably a reflection of that I'm disorganized, right? And so I almost use them as indicators or measures of like, oh, a lot's going on because I got clothes on the ground. And so I try and keep track of that, as well as keep a daily journal. So every day I write down what I did that day. And so I've been doing it for the last 4 years, which has been great. And that's taken a lot of anxiety out. After the psychoed assessment, I've really taken advantage of the SQ4R method. That's changed everything. I think before the psychoed I was doing that, but I didn't know that existed. And I think that's applicable to anyone. You know, it's not just me. I think that's a great way to learn. But afterwards, I knew that it was actually more appropriate for me, and so I've really owned that. I've used Kurzweil. That's, again, revolutionized my life. Before it, I'm a very, very, very slow reader, and with it, I think I returned back to normal. And I had no idea. It's life-changing. But I think the biggest coping is it's all about perspective. In any conflict, there's always, always, always a good and a bad, and it's to try and focus on the good sides. So, for instance, I think I opened up this panel with me stuttering, and I had to stop. I can choose to look at that as a very embarrassing moment, but that's, I think, quite negative, and I think I'm probably going to take more of the approach of like, well, maybe I should prepare more, and I was able to get through it. I took a stop to breathe. I should congratulate myself. So it's kind of, I'm trying to take a moment and take a lesson out of it and see how it affects future behaviors. So I find that's to try and distill or realize everything's perspective. I chose to get out of bed because I want to. I wanted to be here, right? And I should be happy about that. So, yeah.
Thank you. So before we move on to the last question, which I'll ask Ben to start with, I just want to thank you, appreciate the wisdom that you shared. I mean, I think many of the things you talked about in terms of coping, we could all learn from those things. So thank you very much for that. So let's go to Ben to look at the last question, I should say. What do you think we can do to improve the services that you receive on campus, and what would you like to see?
I'm just gonna pause for a second because I can do this the super long way, but we don't want to sit through that.
No.
Or yeah, so I'm gonna try to condense this, I guess. Yeah.
The condensed version would be great.
Yeah. So I think one thing that's really big, and I'd say it's still really important, is just awareness is a huge thing. Like, it's not specific to the school, actually, but just as an example, my dentist recently in his building got a new elevator, so it doesn't have buttons in it anymore, and there's no braille in it. There's a touchscreen now, but the thing about the touchscreen is that it doesn't announce what floor you're on. It doesn't really tell you what floor you're going to or anything like that, so if you can't see, you're screwed. So what I'm talking about with awareness here is that I think it's just important that awareness and communication. So we actually want to be able to talk to accessibility services or the professors or even just other students so that we can kind of explain like, hey, this is what's going on with me. This is the kind of help that I need if I'm not doing things necessarily up to speed, or if I'm messing something up. This might be why. Maybe you can help me out. Maybe we can help each other out. Just anything like that, really.
That's great. Thank you. Jessica, tell us about what we could be doing differently to improve services.
I think the first thing that I would suggest is to spend more time with the community that you want to serve, outside of a mechanical 45-minute meeting. I know that's asking a lot, but you'll understand so much more if you spend time with the community. I was volunteering with the CNIB for a moment, and I was working with this woman who was a new hire, and I was the first blind person she had met, and she had been working there for 6 months, and I was like, that's not okay. Sorry. Like, she was like, what do you need? What do blind people need? And I was like, well, I don't speak for all blind people, but you should probably meet some. So I would suggest to make an effort to get to know the communities that you want to serve and do better for. I also practice interdependence, which is where when a service provider provides something for me, I also want to feel like I can give something back to them. So I guess like and it's much more complicated than that. So read up on interdependence, but treat everybody like a human, and also remember that you're a human and you're not a machine as the provider, as somebody who is inclined to want to support and help people. I think for me, when I know that I feel like a human being and the person I work with feels like a human being, we can like make more change together. I think we can think better together. My supervisor is very honest with me for my PhD about when she's going through a hard time and her boundaries and things, and she will acknowledge when I'm having a hard time. And I think that kind of interdependence, that acknowledgement of humanhood, personhood, is really effective in making good changes. So yeah, I would say meet with your communities more, spend more time with them, learn from them, as opposed to making assumptions, and I think more qualitatively, getting that kind of sense, the nuances, and as well, like, admit that you're also a human, and that you have needs as well. And like, I think I'm much more likely to open up to somebody who's like, I have a hard time with X, and then I'll be like, I have a hard time with X too, or like, I like pizza, you like pizza, this is great. Like, that's much more, I don't know, it's much more efficient way of making connections, and I think that's like the first step for me. Both of those examples are from experience of not feeling like a person and feeling like no one knows what my community is. So I guess from like my lived experience, those are my two pearls.
Thank you. Ty, tell us a little bit of what services could we improve?
What was it? When I went through all that stuff, quite early on, I had an advocate who connected me with someone, and she had called, and just after introducing her name, she said that she had dyslexia, and like whatever. Afterwards, it didn't matter. It was an inclusive approach where there was no border between one providing the service between one receiving it, where I felt level. Like I wasn't, trying to catch up and like meet some sort of threshold, that the person providing the service was at my level. And she had done that by, I think, demonstrating a weakness and extending So I think the best service, not only listening, but also to understand when we define, some sort of boundary between one group and another, it perpetuates the divide. And it's about breaking that divide, because if you measure anyone, you're going to find a disability. So it's not a matter of, someone's not disabled versus someone is. We're all disabled to a certain degree. And so it's about, I think, removing the divide.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Faith, would you like to finish us off with how would you like to see services improved?
Sure. Well, some great points from my colleagues. I think just to add to that, one thing would be just communication. And I guess just to speak to, some of the comments that I made earlier, just making sure that policies make sense when they're put together in terms of context. I think that there's just been a lot of times in my education where I haven't been able to receive an accommodation because of a policy. And I think just to speak to what Jessica was saying, I think it's really important that when we're making policies to remember the people we're making the policies for. I think that consultation is an important part of that. Yeah.
So a lot of real focus on making connections, humanizing the interactions with one another, building that awareness of who you're providing services to, is kind of what I've heard. So maybe I'll just turn it over to our audience and see if there were any final questions you'd like to ask this outstanding panel that we've had here this afternoon. Yes. Somebody got a microphone for this lady right here? Right.
Hi, in terms of consultations, and this is something actually I'm struggling with right now myself, because I also work in my particular library in a UX area, and it's how do we consult with a wide variety of people, because our regular recruitment methods aren't, because again, there'll be things like posters, right? And possibly email, but our university, it's only under very certain circumstances that we can actually send out emails. So in terms of types of recruitment methods that would reach a wide array of students, do you have any suggestions for me?
Yeah, Ty? Do you want-
Yeah. I don't know what the business term is, but I think the best way to disseminate any sort of knowledge is to, I think, advocate for the student body to talk amongst themselves, and so to create some sort of incentive to do that, and in a way that's not stigmatizing.
Right.
And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm here. It's because it's vulnerable for me to be here, but you know, it's easy for me to say that given my position, I think, where I'm at right now. You know, it's easy for me to say that I'm already in medicine, and had you told me this diagnosis when I was 10 years old, it would be a totally different outcome. But I think by me being here, when I was 10, I still had the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I want to show by example that it can be done. Like anything can be done if you work hard enough. And so that should be celebrated, and it should be encouraged amongst the student population so that no one feels outed. Mm-hmm. I don't want to, I felt vulnerable to sometimes bring it up with certain classmates, but now I'm of the mindset, I don't really care. I think we need to get there. And the sooner we do that, I think it will.
Any other thoughts from any of the other panel members on that question? Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I don't know if this might actually be helpful or not, but I think it's this week actually the CNIB and some other organizations are hosting an event for White Cane Week. And so what's happening is, I think it's this weekend, a lot of people from the technology sector and even a few different clubs and sports for the blind people are getting together at the community center by Bloor and Spadina. So the whole point of the event is just showcasing different kinds of technologies and activities for people with visual impairments. The thing that I thought was interesting, I've been to this event a few times in the past, is that you don't really see a lot of stuff there about education specifically. So something that you might consider doing, and it doesn't just have to be for the visually impaired community specifically. I'm sure people with other conditions get organized and get together a lot too, but maybe look into participating in events like that, because you might be able to reach a wider audience that way.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience before we wrap up? Okay. So I just want to thank the four of you. It's been amazing to be part of this panel with you as the moderator. And I've learned a lot just from listening to you, and I'm sure the audience has as well. So thank you for your courage to come up here in front of everyone. And like you said, to be vulnerable in front of others is really quite a courageous act. So thank you for that. And I pass it over to Andrew to wrap up.